I'm gonna explain why I think the one trait change was actually a good thing for merge tactics. But before you click off and call me all sorts of names in the comments, just hear me out. Just yesterday, I actually spoke directly to a merge tactics developer, so I'll be sharing his answers and I'll be giving my responses. And my goal for you by the end of the time you watch this video is to at least hear me out on why I think these changes will be good for the game going forward. But first, just for some quick context, the most recent merge tactics update came with two major changes that I'll be talking about in today's video. The first one is changing troops from having two traits to having only one trait, and the second is the addition of orbs. Now, basically, a lot of people, including myself actually, when I first opened up the dev build maybe a few weeks before the update actually came out, and I saw the one trait system, I actually kind of thought maybe this was like some sort of mistake, because I thought, why would they remove two traits? I feel like that's like the whole point of like comp building. And after the update actually came out, a lot of you guys agreed, saying that, oh, having only one trait now makes the comps less versatile. You can't make as many comps, you can't mix and match troops. Now, if you want to run a comp, you have to literally just spam all the troops in one trait, and it makes just things way more dull now, because now there's only, what, 6 traits, I guess technically 5 that you can actually buy, excluding the boss trait. And another point is that with 2 traits, you have way more depth, because now there's all these more complicated comps, you can run way more comps. So if you're in like a pinch or something and you need to pivot, there's way more options opened up. So from a competitive standpoint, 2 trait is a lot more complex. And so I actually brought this up with one of the developers in the creators group chat, and I said, hey, I listed all these reasons, and I said, why did you guys make the change? Like this, there's clearly a lot of pros with 2 traits. And what they said was actually pretty interesting. They first brought up that the change from having 2 traits to only 1 trait, that major change got challenged internally, so I guess a lot of the people disagreed as well, but that their major goal with this 1 trait change is basically to make the game simpler, which is what a lot of people suspected, I guess, felt the results of, like, oh, this feels dumbed down, which is true. And they brought up another reason, which is that they didn't like how repetitive the game felt with 2 traits, how people just sort of spam the same comps. Like, I guess you can think of it as in like, oh, you just like watched my video or something of like the top 3 comps and you just like sort of memorize and spam, which I do think has some merit. I don't think he's wrong completely in that sense, because what does every player do in merge tactics when the season starts? You just look up a comp, try to memorize comp, have like a toolkit of different comps, and then you just sort of go for that. That's how the gameplay was last season, and they basically didn't like how repetitive that felt. And I do agree to an extent, right? That's just what people do. I guess like in an ideal world, where the game is completely adapted, you'd have to just like maybe adapt every decision on the spot, not just use like pre-made comps. But I feel like that's sort of impossible to achieve, because even in like other auto chess games like TFT, there's always bound to be comps, right? There's always going to be, better trade combinations, better troops. Nothing's ever going to be like perfectly balanced where you can just pick and like anything on the spot and be at like a completely equal, I guess, competitive advantage. And you could also say that having 1 trait this season is even more repetitive, because there's only, what, 2 good traits, Undead and Noble. You just spam that, and then the only adaptation is just depending on, the other 2 spots, right? And so I brought up some of these, points to him, and he basically said that, they're very flexible, right? If these things just are not going to plan, which obviously they really are right now, and if things are just bad, the community just responds negatively for like, the entire season, then yeah, like they're open to reverting it back to 2 traits. But the next thing he said is actually something I wholeheartedly agree with, and why I think this 1 trait change is actually good for the game in the long run. He said his ideal merge tactics is an easy to learn but hard to master game, and that this change was an attempt to go in that direction. And while I do think that yes, the current version of 1 trait is bad, like it's worse than 2 trait, like obviously, while I do think that's bad, I do think that this change, the fact that they were willing to, make a huge change like this, is a step in the right direction. Because as someone who's played merge tactics since the beginning of time, basically, I did recognize a key problem that the game had, which is the fact that merge tactics simply just isn't popular and it's not converting enough players. I actually think that there are 4 types of merge tactics players. Number 1, you have your very invested players like myself, and maybe like some of you watching, who spent a lot of time, playing the game, learning the comps, improving. That group, you don't have to work as hard to like satisfy, right? Obviously, you don't like kill off your game, right? But you don't have to spend a lot of effort to do anything for those people in particular. Number 2 is the casual players, the players that, play like maybe a couple times a week, You know, players that don't really care about like, you know, the grinding trophies or learning about the game. It's just sort of like a time killer for them. Number 3, you have players that have tried merge tactics, maybe one or a few games, and they're like, I'm just not really liking it. Yeah, I'm not really getting into it, but they've had an open mind, right? They've tried the game and they just said it wasn't their cup of tea, right? And then the 4th group is the people that are like, I'm never gonna play this game. Now, for the first 2 groups, they play the game. You know, for the most part, that's, you know, they're good, right? But I think the groups that they need to focus on, by they I mean Supercell Merge Tactics, is groups 3 and 4. Now, for group 4, you know, the people that are like, I'm never playing this game. Like, if you go on Twitter or YouTube, they're like, oh my god, the 5 merge tactics players are satisfied with this, or I don't know, something like that. Like, I mean, you can't really do anything about that, right? You know, because they already have their mind up. And, you know, psychology tells us that when people just have their mind up, like, you know, when you're in like an argument or something and, you know, that other person is wrong, but they don't want to, like, I guess, you know, say that they're wrong, you know, their mind is made up. They're not going to change their mind. That's group 4. There's not really much you can do about that. But group 3, I feel like you can do a lot about, because I think group 3 is the second biggest group. I feel like group 4 is probably the biggest group, but group 3 has quite a lot of people. I know quite a lot of people that have tried the game like with an open mind. They're like, it's just not for me. And I think that a major reason of that is because merge tactics this far with the 2 trait system has been on the contrary to Clash Royale, which in my opinion is an easy to learn, hard to master game. Merge tactics is a hard to learn, easy to master game. Because if you think about Clash Royale, it's easy to learn in the sense that the base mechanic is pretty simple. Like, you just drag, you drop a troop, you know, every time you place a troop, it depletes your elixir. Like, basically getting past the first game is simple, right? But obviously it's hard to master, right? You know, like Mohammed Light, like nobody's, you know, that guy is like insane. Like, you know, there's levels to this, right? But with merge tactics, when you hop into your first game, what are you greeted by? You're greeted by, oh, there's what, 9 different rulers in the game with their own abilities. I guess now there's ruler quests. There's 3 quests within the ruler quest. There's orbs. In the past, there were 2 traits. There were like 16 traits you had to keep track of. There were like 24 different troops. I don't know, last season. There's all this stuff you had to keep track of. So it's like, you can't really like learn the base mechanic of the game in the first few games. So instead of Clash Royale, where it's like, oh, you just play a few games in the tutorial, you learn how to drag and drop your troops, like that's like enough to get you going, and then it scales up, you know, obviously like linearly, I think. Merge tactics, when you first play, you're met with this like big wall of like stuff you have to like actually learn, and then once you get over that wall, it becomes way easier. And I think that's a big reason why, you know, this group 3 has, a lot of them have just quit, because there's this huge hurdle they have to overcome. They're like, yeah, there's just too much. I'm not trying to do all that. Which this model is just clearly not working for merge tactics. So yeah, I think the game should be simpler, and this wall should definitely be trimmed a lot down. And I think one trait was a genuine attempt to accomplish that. Now, did it work? No, it didn't work, obviously. You know, it created a lot more problems of its own. But I do think that change was a step in the right direction. And I do think that the developers' response saying like, yeah, that was our attempt, you know, we're very flexible, you know, we're willing to like revert the changes or, you know, make changes in the future, you know, because things aren't working out. I feel like that's a step in the right direction for sure. I think that step is just very good for the game in the long term. That's what I mean by the title. I think one trait is good for the game in the long run, not necessarily in its current version. Because I think what merge tactics needs right now to grow in popularity, you know, thrive as a game and survive, is for it to get closer to that model of easy to learn, hard to master. So the second major issue I want to talk about in this video is orbs. So basically what I brought up to him about orbs is that, dude, orbs are way too RNG based. You know, there's people that are getting really good stuff like 3-star monks, which indirectly is a 4-star monk because you can have access to 4 more copies in the pool, which most of the times aren't contested unless they unlock a monk. So you basically get a 4-star monk that's extremely OP. And then on the other hand, you have people receiving like trash items like a goblin loot, or like a spirit empress getting like 20 elixir when she already has infinite elixir. And I said, hey, this is really frustrating. And also regarding boss troops, there's no counterplay to that, right? Like if somebody else gets like a 3-star Mega Knight and you don't have access to the Mega Knight, like there's literally nothing you can do. So many more games this season are literally just 100% out of your control. And yeah, I think this is obviously just a bad thing, like especially when multiple things have 0 counterplay, like it's just not good for the game, right? And so his response was basically just talking about the RNG and merge tactics, which I actually think is a really important point that, needed to be brought up over multiple seasons, right? Which is how RNG based should merge tactics be? And a lot of people's concerns, including mine, were basically that, hey, they're making merge tactics way too luck based. And I basically talked about this with him, and he said, yeah, you know what? We need to control the randomness with these orbs, so that's open to being reworked in the future. So we agreed that merge tactics should have some luck involved. I don't want it to be like this zero luck, like 100% technical game. That wouldn't be so good. But the luck needs to be controlled. Like I think the previous seasons were fine, but this is just too much. So they're gonna be reworking the orbs, I think, in the future. So all in all, while I do think the current version of one trait has a lot of flaws, I would say it's more negative than it is positive. I do appreciate how the team is willing to make an attempt to make it a more easy to learn, hard to master game, since I do think that's the ideal version of merge tactics. And I honestly do think that it's a change that at least needed to be made. Like, I think if we were going at this pace for the rest of time, this two trait system, them just adding a new ruler, maybe some new troops every once in a while, I just don't really see the game getting popular. Now, obviously, I think merge tactics has a ceiling. I don't think it's going to be like the most popular game or anything. But I do think that we can make some more growth for sure if it's a more easy to learn game, since that'll attract way more players. And I know I typically don't make this sort of commentary focused video, but I thought that a lot of people were sort of in the dark. Like, this huge update came out with a lot of game changing things, and you don't know why it's happening. There's no like message from like any developers or anything. It just all comes like all at once. So okay, hold on, pause. But I basically just wanted to maybe share some of the reasoning behind these changes, so that you guys understand and aren't left in the dark. So hopefully the devs make good changes in the future. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate if you liked and subbed. We're almost at 50k. I'll be giving away 10 Tomb Queen skins at 50k.